Bullies broke her wings each morning, until one human girl broke their faces. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The corridors of Celestial Heights Academy gleamed with the sterile perfection that came from 1,000 years of advanced technology, but no amount of engineering could scrub away the cruelty that festered in its hallways. In the third wing of the secondary education complex, where species from 40 different worlds mingled in mandatory integration classes, a small Avarian girl named Chira pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible as footsteps approached. The Galactic Education Initiative had seemed like such a noble idea when the Council of Worlds had implemented it 3 generations ago. Bring together the youth of every member species, they had said, and teach them unity through shared experience. What they had not anticipated, or perhaps had chosen to ignore, was that bullies existed in every species, and when you gave them targets from other worlds, their creativity in finding new ways to cause pain became truly universal. Chira clutched her books tighter to her chest, her delicate feathers ruffling with anxiety. She was small even for an Avarian, barely reaching 4 feet in height, with plumage that shimmered in soft blues and silvers. Her people were known across the galaxy for their beautiful voices and their peaceful nature, qualities that had made them beloved diplomats and artists. They were also known for something else, something that made Chira's stomach twist with dread every morning when she walked through the academy doors. Avarians had wings. Not the massive, powerful wings of Earth's eagles or the Velcrin battle flyers. Avarian wings were delicate things, beautiful and fragile, with feathers so fine they seemed to catch and hold light like prismatic crystals. They were not built for extended flight and standard gravity, serving more as gliding appendages and emotional indicators, much like the tails of Earth's cats or dogs. When an Avarian was happy, their wings would flutter and spread. When afraid, they would fold tight against their back. Chira's wings were folded so tightly now that they ached. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the clicking sound that Thraken claws made on polished floors. Chira's heart, which beat nearly 3 times faster than a human's even at rest, began to race. She tried to slip into the nearby classroom, but the door was locked. Classes wouldn't start for another 20 minutes. She was alone in the hallway with them. There were 3 of them, as always. The Thraken were a reptilian species from a high-gravity world, built like walking tanks with scales that could turn aside anything short of a plasma cutter. They towered over most other species at the academy, reaching nearly 8 feet in height, with shoulders broader than a human's arm span. Their culture valued strength above all else, and they had nothing but contempt for what they saw as weakness. The leader was called Drask. His scales were deep green with striations of black, and his eyes held the cold, calculating intelligence of a predator who enjoyed playing with his food. Beside him walked Scorn and Vec, both slightly smaller but no less cruel. Chira tried to walk past them, her head down, hoping that if she didn't make eye contact, they might leave her alone. It had never worked before, but hope was a stubborn thing. Drask's tail whipped out, blocking her path. Then Drask said, "Where are you flying to this morning, little bird?" "Oh wait, that's right. You can't actually fly, can you?" The other 2 laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Chira's voice came out barely above a whisper. She said, "Please, I just want to go to class." Scorn moved to block her other side. He said, "But we're just being friendly. We want to see your pretty wings. Show us your wings, little bird." Chira shook her head, backing against the wall. She knew what was coming. It happened every morning, with a regularity that made her dread each new day. The Thraken found it endlessly amusing. Drask reached out with one massive claw and grabbed the edge of her right wing, pulling it away from her body. Avarian wings were sensitive, full of nerves that made them excellent for feeling air currents and temperature changes. They were not meant to be grabbed roughly by creatures 10 times stronger than their owners. Chira cried out in pain, a sound that was almost musical even in distress. That only made them laugh harder. Then Drask said, "So fragile. I barely touched it. What happens if I do this?" He bent the wing backward, not quite hard enough to break the delicate bones, but more than hard enough to cause screaming pain. Chira dropped her books, tears streaming down her face as she tried desperately to pull away. But moving only made it worse. The torture went on for 5 minutes, though to Chira it felt like hours. They would bend her wings, pluck feathers, sometimes even step on them. They were always careful not to break anything permanently. Broken bones would bring the medical staff, and that would mean questions. But pain, fear, and humiliation left no physical evidence that their scanners could detect. When they finally grew bored and released her, Chira collapsed to the floor, sobbing quietly as she tried to gather her scattered books with shaking hands. Her wings hung limp at her sides, several feathers drifting to the ground. They would grow back, they always did, but each lost feather felt like losing a piece of herself. The Thraken walked away laughing, and Chira remained on the floor, trying to compose herself before other students arrived. She couldn't let them see her cry. That would only make it worse. This had been her life for the past 6 months, ever since her family had been transferred to this sector. 6 months of daily torment, of dreading each morning, of wings pulled and feathers torn. She had reported it once, in the beginning, but the Academy administration had done nothing. The Thraken were an important species politically. Their homeworld controlled vast resources that the Council needed. A small Avarian girl's complaints were not enough to risk diplomatic incident. So Chira suffered in silence, and each day a little more of her spirit died. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that a new student had transferred to Celestial Heights Academy just yesterday. She didn't know that this new student was human, and that humans had very particular opinions about bullies. The new student's name was Riley Cooper, and she was currently sitting in the administration office filling out the last of her transfer paperwork. At 16 years old, Riley was of average height for a human female, standing around 5 feet 6 inches, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and green eyes that missed very little. She wore the Academy's standard uniform, though she had already modified it slightly, rolling up the sleeves and adding a few patches from her previous school. Humans were relatively new to the Galactic Education Initiative. Their species had only joined the Council of Worlds 20 years ago, and they were still considered something of a curiosity by the older races. Most species had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before humanity had even invented the wheel. Even now, humans were seen as primitive, aggressive, and dangerously unpredictable. Riley didn't particularly care what other species thought of her people. She had transferred to Celestial Heights because her parents, both serving in the Human Diplomatic Corps, had been assigned to this sector. It was her third academy in 4 years, and she had learned to adapt quickly. Make a few friends, keep your head down, survive until the next transfer. The administrator, a Gelthian with 2 mini eyes and a perpetually nervous disposition, slid the last data pad across the desk. The administrator said, "Everything appears to be in order, Miss Cooper. Your schedule has been loaded onto your personal device. I trust you will find Celestial Heights Academy to be an enriching educational experience." Riley took the pad and stood. She said, "Sure. Where's my first class?" The administrator provided directions, and Riley set off into the maze of corridors. The academy was enormous, designed to accommodate species with vastly different needs. Sections with different gravity, atmosphere, even time cycles. The human-compatible zones were clearly marked, though Riley had undergone enough xenobiological training to survive in most standard environments. She was early, intentionally so. Riley liked to scout new territory before it was crowded. As she walked through the third wing corridor toward her first class, she heard a sound that made her stop. It was crying, soft and musical, coming from around the corner ahead. Riley's first instinct was to mind her own business. Getting involved in other people's problems on the first day was a quick way to make enemies. But something about that sound, the sheer misery in it, made her hesitate. She had been the new kid enough times to know what it felt like to be alone and hurting. She turned the corner and saw Chira. The Avarian girl was still on the floor, trying to gather her books while her wings hung at odd angles. Feathers lay scattered around her, and her whole body was shaking with suppressed sobs. When she heard footsteps, she looked up with terror in her eyes, clearly expecting more torment. Riley stopped, taking in the scene. She had seen plenty of bullying in her years at various schools, both human and alien. She recognized the signs immediately: the scattered books, the trembling, the way the girl tried to make herself smaller. But the wings, Those beautiful damaged wings told a story that made Riley's jaw tighten. Riley knelt down a few feet away, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. She said, "Hey, you okay?" Chira stared at her, confusion mixing with the fear. She had never spoken to a human before. Humans were so rare at the academy that she had only seen them from a distance. This one had kind eyes, though, not mocking or cruel. Chira's voice was barely audible. She said, "I'm fine." Riley looked at the scattered feathers, then back at Chira's face. She said, "You're a terrible liar." "What happened?" Chira hesitated. Every instinct told her to say nothing, to not make trouble, to just accept her fate. But something about the way this human looked at her, with genuine concern rather than pity or contempt, made the words spill out. She said, "The Thraken. They do this every morning. They grab my wings and bend them and pull out my feathers. They think it's funny." Riley's expression didn't change, but something cold and hard entered her eyes. She said, "How long has this been going on?" Chira said, 6 months. "Since I arrived." Riley stood up slowly. She said, "Show me who did this." Chira shook her head frantically. She said, "No, please. It will only make it worse. They're so much stronger and they have friends and nobody will help me, and if you get involved they'll hurt you too, and—" Riley held up a hand, cutting off the panicked stream of words. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. She said, "I'm not going to let them hurt you again, and they're not going to hurt me. Trust me on that." Chira wanted to protest more, but something in the human's tone stopped her. There was a certainty there, a confidence that seemed almost alien itself. Humans were supposed to be weak, weren't they? Not as weak as Avarians, certainly, but nothing compared to a Thraken. Riley helped Chira gather her books, then picked up the fallen feathers with surprising gentleness. She said, "These important to you?" Chira nodded, taking them carefully. She said, "We keep our shed feathers. It's tradition, but these were torn out. It's not the same." Riley's jaw tightened further. She said, "What's your name?" Chira said, "Chira. Chira Windsong." Riley said, "Riley Cooper. Nice to meet you. Chira, now, I need you to tell me what these Thraken look like." As it happened, Riley didn't have to wait long for a description. The warning bell for first period sounded, and students began filling the hallways. Among them, swaggering with the confidence of untouchable predators, came Drask and his 2 companions. Chira saw them and immediately tried to hide behind Riley, her wings folding tight against her back again. That reaction told Riley everything she needed to know. The Thraken noticed them, and Drask's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. He had seen humans before, but had never bothered with them much. They were too rare to make good targets, and their diplomatic status made them somewhat protected. But this one was standing with the little bird, which made her fair game in his mind. Drask walked over, his friends flanking him. He said, "Made a new friend, little bird? Does your friend know how easy it is to make you sing?" He reached out toward Chira's wing. His claw never made contact. Riley's hand shot out and caught his wrist in mid-motion. The Thraken's scales were tough, built to withstand incredible pressure, but Riley's grip found the joint where the scales were thinner. She didn't squeeze hard, not yet. She just held his wrist immobile, stopping his motion completely. Drask stared down at the human in shock. No one had ever dared to touch him like this. He was Thraken. He was powerful. This tiny human should not be able to stop him. Riley's voice was very quiet, but it carried clearly. She said, "You're going to want to back up now." Drask's shock turned to rage. He tried to pull his arm free, putting real strength into it. Riley's grip didn't budge. Her hand remained locked around his wrist like a steel band. Around them, other students had stopped to watch. Confrontations were common enough at the academy, but this was unusual. A human standing up to a Thraken? That never happened. Drask snarled, showing rows of sharp teeth. He said, "Let go of me, human, or I will break you." Riley said, "Funny. That's exactly what I'm going to do to you if you ever touch her again." Scorn and Vec moved forward, thinking to intimidate the human with numbers. Riley didn't even glance at them. Her eyes remained locked on Drask. She said, "Here's how this is going to work. You 3 are going to leave Chira alone. Completely alone. You're not going to touch her, talk to her, or even look at her. If I find out you did, I'm going to find you. And trust me, you don't want that." Drask laughed, though it sounded forced. He said, "You think you scare me, human? You're soft. Weak. Your people are barely civilized. I could tear you apart." Riley smiled. It was not a friendly expression. She said, "You could try." Then she squeezed. The sound of Drask's wrist plates cracking echoed through the hallway. The Thraken's eyes went wide with pain and shock as Riley's fingers dug into the joint with precisely applied pressure. She wasn't just strong. She knew exactly where to apply that strength for maximum effect. Drask tried to strike at her with his other hand, but Riley ducked under it easily, pulling him off balance with the wrist she still held. In one smooth motion, she twisted his arm behind his back and drove him face first into the wall. The impact was hard enough to crack one of his scales. Scorn and Vec rushed forward to help their leader. Riley released Drask and spun to face them. What happened next would be talked about in the academy for years to come. Scorn threw a punch that would have shattered concrete. Riley sidestepped it by millimeters, her movement economical and precise. As his fist passed her, she grabbed his arm and used his own momentum to send him crashing into Vec. Both Thraken went down in a tangle of limbs and tails. Drask had recovered and charged at her from behind, roaring with rage. Riley heard him coming. Every species made noise when they moved, and humans had spent millions of years evolving to track prey by sound. She dropped low, and Drask's charge carried him over her. As he passed, she drove her elbow upward into his stomach, right where the scales were softer. The air exploded from his lungs, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping. The entire fight had taken less than 10 seconds. Riley stood in the center of the hallway, not even breathing hard, while 3 Thraken lay groaning around her. Every student who had stopped to watch was silent, staring in disbelief. Thraken were supposed to be unstoppable. They came from a high-gravity world that made them naturally stronger and tougher than almost any other species. They trained in combat from childhood, and a human girl had just taken down 3 of them like they were nothing. Riley looked down at Drask, who was still trying to remember how to breathe. She said, "I'm going to say this once more, and I suggest you listen carefully. Leave Chira alone. If you don't, next time I won't be gentle." She turned to Chira, who was staring at her with an expression of absolute wonder. Riley's voice softened. She said, "Come on, let's get to class." They walked away together, leaving the 3 Thraken on the floor. Behind them, the hallway erupted in excited chatter. By the end of the day, everyone in the academy would know what had happened. The human girl who had beaten 3 Thraken without breaking a sweat. The human girl who had stood up for an Avarian that no one else had bothered to help. Chira walked beside Riley in a daze. She said, "How did you do that? They're so much stronger than humans. Everyone knows humans are one of the weaker species." Riley laughed. She said, "Is that what everyone knows? Chira, let me tell you something about humans. We're not the strongest species, that's true. We're not the fastest or the toughest, but we're really, really good at fighting. We've been doing it for our entire existence. Every human learns basic self-defense, and where I come from, you learn a lot more than basic." Chira's wings had begun to relax slightly, no longer pressed tight against her back. She said, "But they were so big." Riley said, "Size isn't everything. Technique matters. Knowing where to hit matters. And willingness to actually fight back matters most of all. Those guys are used to everyone being afraid of them. They've probably never had anyone actually fight back before. Bullies are like that. They fold as soon as someone stands up to them." They reached their first class, which turned out to be Galactic History. As they entered, every head turned to look at them. Word had already spread. Riley ignored the stares and found 2 seats near the back. Chira sat next to her, still processing what had happened. The teacher, an elderly Velcrin with scales that had faded to silver with age, eyed them both. She said, "I trust there will be no more disruptions today, Miss Cooper?" Riley said, "No, ma'am. Everything's peaceful now." The teacher's expression suggested she doubted that, but she began her lesson. Chira tried to focus on the lecture about the founding of the Council of Worlds, but her mind kept replaying the scene in the hallway. The way Riley had moved, so fast and sure. The way she had spoken to Drask, with no fear at all. The way she had defended Chira without even knowing her. No one had ever defended her before. When class ended, Chira expected Riley to go her own way. The human had helped her, which was more than anyone else had done, but that didn't mean they were friends. That didn't mean Riley would want to keep spending time with an Avarian nobody, but Riley waited for her to gather her things. She said, "What class do you have next?" Shira checked her schedule. She said, "Applied Mathematics in the East Wing." Riley said, "I'm heading that way too. Want to walk together?" Shira's wings fluttered, the first time they had done so in months. It was a gesture of happiness, of hope. She said, "Yes, I would like that very much." They walked through the hallways together, and Shira noticed something different. Other students were looking at her, but not with the usual mixture of pity and contempt. They were looking at her with interest, even respect, because she was walking with Riley Cooper, the human who had done the impossible. As the days passed, Shira found her life transforming in ways she had never imagined possible. The Thraken left her completely alone. Drask and his friends went out of their way to avoid any corridor where Riley might be, and by extension, where Shira might be. The other students who had witnessed that first confrontation had spread the word far and wide. Don't mess with the human girl, and definitely don't mess with anyone the human girl had claimed as a friend. But Riley's protection was only part of the change. The bigger transformation came from Riley herself, from their growing friendship. They ate lunch together every day in the Academy's communal dining hall. The first few times, Shira had been nervous, expecting Riley to grow bored with her. But Riley seemed genuinely interested in learning about Avarian culture, about Shira's homeworld with its floating cities and crystal forests, about the complex musical language that Avarians used for formal occasions. In return, Riley told her about Earth, about a world covered in water and land in almost equal measure, about the bewildering diversity of human cultures and languages, about the fact that humans had only recently unified as a species and still argued constantly about almost everything. Riley said, "We're kind of a mess, honestly. We spent most of our history fighting each other over every stupid reason you can imagine. Religion, resources, land, ideology, sometimes just because we didn't like how the other group looked. It's only in the last century or so that we've started to mostly get along." Shira found that hard to believe. She said, "But you stopped fighting each other? How?" Riley shrugged. She said, "I think we realized we had bigger things to worry about. When we met other species and discovered we weren't alone in the universe, it kind of put our petty differences in perspective. Plus, we're really good at finding common enemies to unite against." Shira said, "Is that why you helped me? Because you see the Thraken as enemies?" Riley was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. She said, "No. I helped you because what they were doing was wrong. Because you needed help and no one else was giving it. Because where I come from, you don't let bullies win. It's that simple." But it wasn't simple to Shira. It was everything. For 6 months she had suffered, had endured daily torment because she believed she had no choice. Because she was small and weak and alone. Riley had shown her something different. That you always had a choice. That sometimes you had to stand up or find someone willing to stand with you. Shira's wings, which had hung limp and lifeless for so long, began to regain their luster. The damaged feathers grew back, more beautiful than before. And for the first time since arriving at Celestial Heights Academy, Shira felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt safe. But safety, as both girls would soon learn, was a more complicated thing than it appeared. 3 weeks after the incident in the hallway, Riley and Shira were in the Academy's recreational wing, a massive space filled with facilities for dozens of different sports and activities. Shira had been hesitant to come. Physical activities had always been difficult for her, another source of mockery. Her people's light bone structure made them fragile, and their wings, while beautiful, were not particularly useful in the Academy's standard gravity environment. But Riley had insisted. She said, "Trust me. I think you'll like this." She led Shira to one of the smaller chambers, this one set up with adjustable gravity controls. It was primarily used by species who needed low-gravity environments to function comfortably, but it was currently empty. Riley worked the controls, and Shira felt the oppressive weight that always pressed on her diminish. The gravity dropped to 0.4 standard, roughly equivalent to her homeworld. Immediately, her body felt lighter, stronger. Her wings, which she had kept folded tight out of habit, began to relax. Riley smiled. She said, "Go on. Fly." Shira stared at her. She said, "I can't. I mean, I can glide a little, but true flight requires much lower gravity or wind currents, and Riley said, Chira, the gravity's at point 4. That's your homeworld's level, right? So fly. Show me what you can really do when you're not being weighed down. Chira looked around the chamber. It was large, with high ceilings and plenty of open space. The gravity was perfect, and for the first time in months, she felt the old longing, the desire that every Avarian carried in their hearts. She spread her wings. They extended to their full span, nearly 6 feet from tip to tip, the feathers catching the light and throwing it back in iridescent patterns. Riley whistled appreciatively. Riley said, Wow, those are incredible. Chira felt a flush of pride. Then, with a powerful downstroke that sent a rush of air through the chamber, she launched herself into the air. Flying had always been as natural to her as breathing. In her homeworld's lower gravity, Avarians could spend hours aloft, soaring on thermals and diving through cloud formations. She had not flown, truly flown, since leaving her home. The Academy's standard gravity made it impossible, and even in the rare low-gravity chambers, she had been too afraid to draw attention to herself. But now, with Riley watching and encouraging her, Chira let herself remember what it felt like to be free. She soared around the chamber, her movements graceful and precise. She dove and spun, her wings adjusting to catch non-existent air currents with practiced ease. For those few minutes, she was not a victim or a target. She was what her people had always been meant to be. She was a creature of the air, beautiful and free. When she finally landed, her face was flushed with joy and her wings were spread wide in happiness. Riley was applauding, a gesture Chira had learned meant approval among humans. Riley said, That was amazing. You're an artist up there. Chira felt tears prickling at her eyes, but these were good tears. She said, Thank you. Thank you for this. I had forgotten what it felt like. Riley said, You shouldn't have to forget. Come here whenever you want. I'll clear it with the rec center coordinator. This time is usually empty anyway. They sat down on one of the benches, the gravity still set to a very uncomfortable levels. Chira felt lighter than she had in months, and not just because of the reduced gravity. For the first time since the bullying had begun, she felt like herself again. Chira said, Riley, can I ask you something? Riley said, Sure. Chira said, Why are humans so good at fighting? I've been researching your species since that day in the hallway. The other species are right. You're not the strongest or the fastest, but you're so much better at combat than you should be. What? Riley was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. She said, That's a complicated question. I guess the simple answer is that we had to be. Earth isn't like most habitable worlds. It's more dangerous. We evolved alongside predators that could kill us easily. We were prey for most of our existence, and the only way we survived was by becoming really, really good at fighting back. Chira said, But you're civilized now. Advanced. Why do you still learn to fight? Riley said, Because the universe is still dangerous. Because there are still predators out there, even if they walk on 2 legs and speak in council chambers. My father taught me something when I was young. He said that the ability to destroy something and the choice not to are 2 different things. Humans learned a long time ago that if you want peace, you need to be capable of war. If you want to be safe, you need to be dangerous. She looked at Chira directly. She said, You're not weak, Chira. Your people aren't weak. You're peaceful, and that's different. But peace without the ability to defend yourself isn't peace. It's just waiting to be victimized. The Thraken targeted you because they thought you couldn't fight back. Once I showed them that someone would fight back, they stopped. Chira absorbed this, her mind working through the implications. She said, So humans believe in strength? Riley shook her head. She said, We believe in not being helpless. There's a difference. Strength without compassion is just bullying. But compassion without strength is just being a victim. You need both. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the artificial breeze from the chamber's circulation system ruffling Chira's feathers. Finally, Chira spoke again. She said, I want to learn. Riley looked at her. She said, Learn what? Chira said, To fight. To defend myself. I don't want to be helpless anymore. I don't want to need someone else to protect me. I want to be able to protect myself. Riley studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. She said, Okay, but you need to understand something first. Learning to fight isn't just about throwing punches. It's about confidence, about not being afraid. It's about knowing that you can take care of yourself. Are you sure that's what you want? Chira's wings spread slightly, a gesture of determination. She said, "Yes, I'm sure." Riley smiled. She said, "All right then. We start tomorrow. Fair warning though, I'm not going to go easy on you just because you're smaller than me. If you're going to learn, you're going to learn properly." Chira said, "I wouldn't want it any other way." The next day, Riley met Chira in one of the Academy's smaller training rooms. These spaces were designed for individual practice or small group instruction, with padded floors and walls to prevent injury. Riley had reserved one for 2 hours after classes. When Chira arrived, she found Riley already there, dressed in loose training clothes rather than the Academy uniform. Riley tossed her a similar outfit. Riley said, "First rule of training. Wear appropriate gear. Can't move properly if you're restricted." Chira changed quickly. The training clothes felt strange, lighter and more flexible than what she usually wore. When she emerged from the changing area, Riley was in the center of the room, going through a series of stretches. Riley said, "Second rule. Always warm up. Pulled muscles are no fun." She led Chira through a stretching routine, teaching her how to loosen each muscle group properly. Chira's lighter bone structure actually made her more flexible than Riley in many ways, though her wings required special attention. Once they were warmed up, Riley moved to the center of the room and gestured for Chira to join her. Riley said, "Okay, first lesson. Do you know what the most important part of fighting is?" Chira thought about it. She said, "Strength?" Riley shook her head. She said, "Balance. If you can't stay on your feet, nothing else matters." So that's where we start. For the next hour, Riley taught Chira basic stances and footwork, how to distribute her weight, how to move efficiently, how to maintain her center of gravity. It was harder than Chira expected. Her instinct was to stay light on her feet, ready to take flight if needed, but Riley kept pushing her to ground herself. Riley said, "I know it feels wrong. Your people are built for the air, not the ground. But right now, we're working in standard gravity. You need to adapt to that." They practiced until Chira's legs were shaking with exhaustion. Only then did Riley call a break. As they sat drinking water, Chira said, "This is much harder than it looks." Riley said, "Everything worth learning is hard at first, but you're doing well. Your center of gravity is lower than mine because you're shorter. That's actually an advantage once you learn to use it. Harder to knock down someone who's naturally lower to the ground." They resumed training, this time working on basic blocks and deflections. Riley threw slow, controlled strikes at Chira, teaching her how to redirect the energy rather than trying to stop it directly. Riley said, "You're never going to be able to match a Thraken for pure strength. So don't try. Use their strength against them. Redirect, unbalance, make them work against themselves." Chira practiced the movements over and over, her muscles burning. Her wings kept trying to spread for balance, an instinct she had to actively suppress. In the low gravity of her homeworld, wings were as much a part of balance as legs. But in standard gravity, spread wings were just a larger target. By the end of the 2-hour session, Chira was exhausted but exhilarated. She had worked harder physically than she ever had before, and while she was nowhere near being able to actually defend herself, she had taken the first steps. Riley said, "You did good today. Really good. Most people quit after the first session because it's too hard. But you stuck with it." Chira said, "When is our next session?" Riley grinned. She said, "Tomorrow. Same time. Hope you're ready to be sore." Chira said, "I'm ready." And she was. For the first time in her life, Chira felt like she was taking control of her own fate. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning to fight back. The training sessions became a regular part of their routine. Every day after classes, Riley and Chira would meet in the training room. Slowly, incrementally, Chira began to improve. Her stances became more solid. Her movements became more confident. She learned to read body language, to anticipate attacks, to react instead of freeze. Riley was a patient but demanding teacher. She never let Chira slack off, but she also knew when to push and when to let her student rest. She taught not just techniques, but philosophy, explaining the reasoning behind every movement. Riley said, "Fighting isn't about being angry or aggressive. It's about being calm and controlled. The moment you lose your temper, you lose the fight. Anger makes you sloppy, makes you predictable. Stay calm, stay focused, and you'll always have the advantage. Shira absorbed these lessons eagerly. But it wasn't just the physical training that changed her. It was the confidence that came with it. Every day she felt a little stronger, a little more capable. The fear that had defined her life for months began to fade, replaced by something else. Not aggression, but self-assurance. The knowledge that she didn't have to be a victim. Other students noticed the change in her. Shira walked differently now, her head held higher, her wings no longer pressed tight against her back in constant fear. She participated more in classes, spoke up when she had opinions, even laughed at jokes in the dining hall. She was becoming herself again. But not everyone was happy about the change. Drask and his companions had been humiliated by their defeat at Riley's hands. In Thraken culture, strength was everything, and they had been beaten by someone they considered inferior. That shame burned in them, festering into resentment. They left Shira alone, as Riley had commanded, but they watched. They waited. They plotted. For weeks after the initial confrontation, they made their move. It happened in one of the Academy's less trafficked corridors. Riley was in a makeup class for quantum physics, a subject she had missed due to her transfer. Shira was walking alone, heading to the library to work on a research project. She should have been more careful, should have stayed in populated areas. But she had grown comfortable in her newfound safety. That comfort almost cost her everything. Drask and 5 other Thraken, not just his usual 2 companions, emerged from a side corridor and surrounded her. They had planned this carefully, waiting for a moment when Riley was occupied, choosing a location with no security cameras. Drask's eyes gleamed with malice. He said, "Hello, little bird. Did you miss us?" Shira's first instinct was the old fear, the urge to fold her wings tight and hope they would get bored quickly. But then she remembered Riley's training. She remembered the stances, the balance, the confidence. She set her books down carefully and faced them. Shira said, "Leave me alone." Her voice didn't shake. That small victory felt enormous. Drask laughed. He said, "Or what? Your human pet isn't here to protect you. And there are 6 of us this time. You think you can fight us all?" Shira knew she couldn't. Riley had taught her a lot, but not enough to take on 6 Thraken. She was still learning, still building strength and skill. Against one opponent, maybe she could manage. Against 6, she would be torn apart. But she had also learned something else from Riley. She had learned not to give up. Shira said, "I don't need to fight all of you. I just need to hurt one of you badly enough that the others think twice." It was a bluff, and not a very good one. But she said it with enough conviction that 2 of the Thraken actually hesitated. Drask noticed and snarled at his companions. Drask said, "She's bluffing. She's nothing. Grab her." They moved forward. Shira fell into the defensive stance Riley had taught her, her weight balanced, her hands up. When the first Thraken reached for her wing, she didn't freeze. She moved. She ducked under his grasping claw and struck upward at his throat, not hard enough to seriously hurt him, but enough to make him gag and stumble back. The second Thraken came at her from the side, and she tried to sidestep like Riley had shown her. She was too slow. His fist caught her in the ribs, and pain exploded through her chest. But she stayed on her feet. That was important. Riley had drilled it into her. Stay on your feet. The moment you go down, you've lost. Shira lashed out with her wing, using it like a club. Avarian wings were fragile, yes, but they were not without some mass. The edge of her wing caught the Thraken across his eyes, and he recoiled more from surprise than pain. Then they were all on her. 6 Thraken, angry and determined to punish her for daring to resist. Shira fought back with everything Riley had taught her, every technique and tactic she had practiced. She managed to land a few more hits, managed to avoid a few strikes, but it was nowhere near enough. A fist caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. A tail sweep took her legs out from under her, and she hit the ground hard. She tried to get up, but they were on her now, pinning her down. This was it. This was where it ended. All her training, all her newfound confidence, and it still wasn't enough. She had tried to stand up to them, and she was going to pay for it. Drask stood over her, his fist raised. He said, "We're going to break more than your wings this time, little bird. We're going to break you." Then a voice cut through the air like a plasma blade. Riley said, "I don't think so." Every head turned. Riley stood at the end of the corridor, and the expression on her face made even the Thraken hesitate. She was not angry. Anger implied a loss of control. Riley was something far more dangerous. She was coldly, absolutely furious. Riley walked toward them with measured steps, each one deliberate and precise. She said, "I told you what would happen if you touched her again. Did you think I was joking?" Drask stood up, leaving Chira on the ground. He tried to muster his usual bravado. He said, "There are 6 of us and 1 of you, human. You may have gotten lucky last time, but not even your species is stupid enough to think they can take those odds." Riley stopped about 10 feet away. Her voice was very quiet. She said, "Let me tell you something about humans, Drask. We don't think much about fair odds. We think about winning. And right now, I'm going to win." She moved. What happened next was a lesson in exactly why humanity had earned its reputation for violence. Riley didn't just fight the 6 Thraken. She dismantled them. The first one lunged at her, confident in his size and strength. Riley slipped past his guard and drove her knee into his midsection with enough force to lift him off his feet. As he doubled over, she brought her elbow down on the back of his neck. He hit the floor and stayed there. The second and third came at her together, trying to use teamwork. Riley used their coordination against them. She ducked under the first one's swing and shoved him directly into his companion. As they tangled together, she spun and delivered a devastating kick to the side of one's knee. Something cracked, and he went down screaming. The other Thraken recovered and swung at her head. Riley leaned back, the fist passing millimeters from her face, then surged forward. She grabbed his arm and twisted, using his own momentum to flip him over her hip. He crashed into the wall hard enough to crack the reinforced plating. 3 down in less than 20 seconds. The remaining 3, including Drask, stared at her with something that might have been respect if it weren't mixed with so much fear. They had never seen anything move like that. Riley wasn't just strong. She was fast, skilled, and absolutely relentless. Drask tried to circle around her, looking for an opening. Riley tracked him with her eyes without moving her head. Riley said, "You really want to do this, Drask? Because I promise you it's going to hurt." Drask roared and charged, his companions following his lead. It was a mistake. Riley had been waiting for them to commit. She met Drask's charge head-on, which surprised him. At the last second, she dropped low and swept his legs. His own momentum sent him crashing over her. As he fell, she sprang up and caught one of the other Thraken with a punch to the throat. He gagged and collapsed, fighting for air. The last one, seeing all his friends defeated, tried to run. Riley let him go. He wasn't worth the effort. Drask struggled to his feet, rage and pain making him sloppy. He swung wildly at Riley, who simply stepped aside and let his fist hit the wall instead. The impact cracked more scales on his knuckles. Before he could recover, Riley grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him down to his knees. She leaned close and spoke directly into his ear. She said, "I'm going to say this one last time. Leave Chira alone. Leave her friends alone. If I ever hear that you've bothered anyone weaker than you again, I won't just beat you. I'll make sure every student in this academy knows that 6 of you couldn't take down 1 human girl and an injured Avarian. Imagine how much respect you'll have then." She released him and stepped back. Drask stayed on his knees for a moment, then slowly stood and backed away. His companions who could still walk helped up those who couldn't, and they retreated down the corridor. Riley watched them go, then turned to Chira, who was still on the ground, staring at her with wide eyes. Riley knelt beside her. Her voice lost its cold edge, becoming gentle. She said, "Hey, you okay? Did they hurt you badly?" Chira shook her head, though she was clearly in pain. She said, "How did you know? You were in class." Riley helped her up carefully, checking her over for serious injuries. She said, "I had a feeling they might try something. So I asked a friend to keep an eye on you and message me if anything happened. The moment I got the alert, I came running." Chira said, "You fought 6 of them." 6. And you won." Riley shrugged. She said, "They're not as tough as they think they are. And honestly, they fight stupidly. No technique, just brute force. Makes them predictable." She picked up Chira's scattered books. She said, "Come on, let's get you to medical. Those ribs need to be checked." As they walked toward the medical wing, Chira said, "I tried to fight them. I used what you taught me, but I wasn't strong enough." Riley stopped and looked at her seriously. She said, "Chira, You stood up to 6 Thraken. Alone. A few weeks ago, you would have just let them hurt you. The fact that you fought back at all is incredible. You're not supposed to be able to take on 6 opponents. Even I shouldn't have won that fight, not realistically. But you tried. That's what matters. Chira's wings fluttered slightly. She said, I didn't want to be helpless again. Riley said, and you weren't. You fought. You landed hits. You stayed on your feet longer than most people would have. Chira, you did everything right. The only problem was you were outnumbered 6-1. That's not a fair test of your skills. They reached the medical wing, where the automated scanners confirmed that Chira had bruised ribs and some muscle strain, but nothing broken. The medical AI administered pain relief and recommended rest. As they left medical, they found themselves facing an unexpected welcoming committee. The Academy's security chief, an imposing Velcrin named Commander Kreth, was waiting for them. Behind her stood the Academy's headmaster, a Gelthian called Chancellor Voss. Commander Kreth's expression was stern. She said, Miss Cooper, Miss Winsong, we need to speak about the incident in Corridor 7B. Riley's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She said, Yes, Commander. They were led to the Chancellor's office, a spacious room filled with artifacts from dozens of different worlds. Chancellor Voss settled behind his desk while Commander Kreth stood to the side, her arms crossed. Chancellor Voss said, Miss Cooper, this is the second violent incident you've been involved in since arriving at our academy. 6 students are currently being treated for injuries you inflicted. This is unacceptable behavior. Riley met his gaze steadily. She said, Those 6 students were assaulting Chira. I stopped them. If that's unacceptable, then your security is inadequate. Commander Kreth bristled. She said, Watch your tone, human. Riley said, My tone is the least of your problems, Commander. For 6 months, Chira has been bullied, assaulted, and terrorized by those same students. She reported it. Nothing was done. Today they escalated to a coordinated attack with 6 against 1. Still, your security was nowhere to be found. So yes, I stopped them. And I'd do it again. Chancellor Voss held up a hand for silence. He said, Is this true, Miss Winsong? You were being bullied and reported it. Chira's voice was small but clear. She said, Yes, Chancellor. For 6 months. Every day, I filed 3 reports. Nothing changed. The Chancellor looked at Commander Kreth. She said, I have no record of such reports. Chira's wings fluttered with agitation. She said, I filed them. I swear I did. Riley said, Of course there's no record. Because actually dealing with it would require confronting the Thraken, and that's politically inconvenient. Easier to just let a small Avarian girl suffer in silence. Chancellor Voss's expression darkened. He said, Miss Cooper, you are dangerously close to insubordination. Riley said, and you're dangerously close to admitting that this academy values political convenience over student safety. Which is it going to be, Chancellor? Are you going to punish me for defending someone who your staff failed to protect? Or are you going to actually do something about the real problem? The room fell silent. Commander Kreth looked furious, but Chancellor Voss seemed more thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. He said, Commander Kreth, I want a full investigation into Miss Winsong's claims. Pull all security footage from the past 6 months. If what she says is true, and reports were filed that disappeared, I want to know who buried them and why. Commander Kreth said, Chancellor, the Thraken Consortium might. Chancellor Voss cut her off. He said, the Thraken Consortium can file a complaint if they wish. But if we've been allowing students to be assaulted on our watch because of political pressure, that's far worse than any diplomatic incident. Do I make myself clear? Commander Kreth nodded stiffly. She said, Yes, Chancellor. He turned to Riley and Chira. He said, As for you two, Miss Cooper, I cannot officially condone your actions, but I also cannot ignore that you were defending another student from assault. Miss Winsong, I apologize that your reports were not properly handled. This academy is supposed to be a place of learning, not fear. That will change, Riley said, and Drask, his friends, Chancellor Voss said, will be dealt with appropriately. If the investigation confirms what Miss Winsong has claimed, they will face serious consequences. As for your role today, Miss Cooper, I'm going to overlook it. This once. But in the future, please come to us first before taking matters into your own hands. Riley nodded. She said, I'll come to you first, Chancellor. But if you don't act, I will. That's not a threat. That's a promise. They were dismissed. As they walked back through the corridors, Chira was quiet, processing everything. Finally, she spoke. She said, "Do you think anything will actually change?" Riley said, "Maybe." The Chancellor seemed sincere. "But we'll see. Either way, Drask isn't going to bother you again. Not after today." Chira said, "You could have been expelled. For fighting them. For talking to the Chancellor like that. You risked everything for me." Riley stopped and looked at her. She said, "Chira, that's what friends do. They stand up for each other. And you're my friend. That means something." Chira felt tears pricking at her eyes. She said, "I've never had a friend like you before." Riley smiled. She said, "Well, you've got one now. Come on, let's get some food. Fighting makes me hungry." They continued to the dining hall together, and Chira realized something. For the first time in 6 months, she felt truly safe. Not because she was protected, though Riley's protection certainly helped, but because she was learning to protect herself. Because she had someone who believed in her. Because she was finding her own strength. In the days that followed, true to his word, Chancellor Voss launched a thorough investigation. Security footage was reviewed, and it quickly became apparent that Chira's claims were not only true, but understated. The recordings showed dozens of incidents over 6 months, each one carefully avoided by the Academy's security patrols. Further investigation revealed that Commander Kreth had been receiving pressure from the Thraken Consortium's diplomatic staff to overlook incidents involving Thraken students. Commander Kreth was removed from her position. Drask and his companions were expelled from the Academy and sent back to their homeworld in disgrace. New security protocols were implemented, with direct oversight from the Council of Worlds to prevent political interference. But perhaps more importantly, the incident sparked a broader conversation throughout the Academy. Other students came forward with their own stories of bullying and harassment. The Academy had been so focused on diplomatic considerations and avoiding interspecies conflict that they had created an environment where the strong could prey on the weak without consequences. That began to change. The new security chief, a gruff human veteran named Marcus Blake, made it clear that every student, regardless of species or political connections, would be treated equally. Incidents were investigated thoroughly. Bullies faced real consequences. The Academy began to feel safer. Riley and Chira continued their training sessions, but they had also attracted attention. Other students, particularly those from smaller or less aggressive species, began asking if they could join. Riley agreed, and soon she was running regular self-defense classes for anyone who wanted to learn. She taught them what her father had taught her, what humanity had learned through millennia of warfare and conflict. That strength without skill was useless. That size didn't matter as much as technique. That the willingness to fight back was often more important than the ability. Chira became Riley's assistant instructor, helping to teach the newer students while continuing her own training. Her confidence grew with each passing day. She would never be a warrior in the traditional sense. That wasn't her nature. But she was no longer a victim. She could defend herself. She could stand tall. 6 months after their first meeting, Riley and Chira were sitting in their usual spot in the dining hall. Chira's wings were spread comfortably, no longer pressed tight against her back. She was laughing at something Riley had said, her musical voice ringing through the space. A small group of younger students approached their table hesitantly. The leader was a tiny insectoid from a species Riley didn't recognize, barely 3 feet tall, with delicate antennae. The insectoid said, "Excuse me, Miss Cooper? Miss Winsong? We were hoping we could ask you something." Riley said, "Sure. What's up?" The insectoid said, "There are some older students who have been bothering us. Taking our food, pushing us around. Nothing violent, but it's constant. We were wondering if maybe you could help." Riley exchanged a glance with Chira. Then she smiled. She said, "Tell you what. Come to the training room tomorrow after classes. We'll teach you how to handle it yourselves." The insectoid's antennae perked up with hope. The insectoid said, "Really? You'll teach us?" Chira said, "Of course. Everyone deserves to feel safe. And everyone can learn to stand up for themselves." The small group thanked them profusely and scurried off, already chattering excitedly. Riley watched them go, then turned to Chira. Riley said, "You've come a long way from that scared girl in the hallway." Chira's wings fluttered, a gesture of happiness. She said, I had a good teacher. You showed me that being small doesn't mean being helpless. That fear is something you can overcome. That you should never accept being a victim. Riley said, You taught yourself that. I just gave you the tools. You're the one who chose to use them. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Chira spoke again. She said, Riley, why did you really help me that first day? You didn't know me. You had just arrived. You could have walked away and avoided all this trouble. Why didn't you? Riley thought about it for a long moment before answering. She said, My father told me something once. He said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. When I saw you in that hallway, I saw someone who needed help. And I knew that if I walked away, if I did nothing, then I was part of the problem. So I helped. It's that simple. Chira said, It's not simple to me. You changed my life. Riley said, No, Chira. You changed your own life. You made the choice to learn, to grow stronger, to stand up for yourself. I just gave you a push in the right direction. Chira said, Then I'm glad you pushed. Before I met you, I was drowning. Every day was torture, and I couldn't see any way out. I thought about leaving the academy, going back home, giving up on my education. But now, things are different. I'm different. And it's because you showed me that I didn't have to accept the way things were, that I could fight to change them. Riley smiled. She said, You know what the funny thing is? I think you helped me too. When I came here, I was just going through the motions. Another academy, another temporary stop before my parents got reassigned somewhere else. I wasn't planning to get involved, to make connections. But then I met you, and suddenly I had a reason to care. You reminded me why this stuff matters. Why we can't just stand by and let bad things happen. They finished their meal and headed to their next class together. As they walked through the corridors, other students nodded to them respectfully. The human girl and the Avarian who had changed the academy. They had become symbols of something important. That courage wasn't about size or strength. It was about refusing to accept injustice. About standing up, even when it was hard. About protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The semester continued, and Riley and Chira's friendship deepened. They studied together, trained together, spent their free time exploring the station and learning about each other's cultures. Chira taught Riley about Avarian music, the complex harmonics that her people used to express emotions too subtle for words. Riley taught Chira about human history, about the countless struggles and triumphs that had shaped her species. They learned from each other in ways that went beyond academics or combat training. Chira learned that strength came in many forms, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that asking for help was often the bravest thing you could do. Riley learned patience, compassion, the value of gentleness in a universe that often rewarded only aggression. Their self-defense classes grew more popular. What had started with a handful of students had expanded to regular sessions with dozens of participants. Riley had to recruit additional instructors to help manage them all. The classes became about more than just fighting. They became about building confidence, about creating a community of students who looked out for each other. The academy's atmosphere changed. Incidents of bullying dropped dramatically. Students who had been targets found their voices, stood up for themselves and others. The strong began to protect the weak rather than prey on them. It wasn't perfect. Problems still existed. But it was better. Much better. On the last day of the school year, the academy held a formal ceremony to honor students who had made exceptional contributions. Riley was surprised when her name was called. Chancellor Voss stood at the podium, addressing the assembled students and faculty. He said, Riley Cooper came to our academy partway through the year, an unknown student from a species many considered primitive. What she has accomplished in her time here extends far beyond academics. She has fundamentally changed the culture of this institution. Through her actions, she has reminded us all that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about moral courage, the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous. He presented her with the Academy's Medal of Honor, the first human to ever receive it. The assembled students erupted in applause, and Riley saw many of her self-defense students on their feet, cheering loudly. But Riley didn't feel like she deserved this alone. She looked at Chira, sitting in the front row with her wings spread in pride, and gestured for her to come up. Riley said, Chancellor, if I may, I didn't do this alone. Chira Winsong showed as much courage as I did. More really. She's the one who chose to fight back, to learn, to change. She's the one who inspired other students to do the same. If anyone deserves recognition, it's her. Chancellor Voss smiled. He said, "An excellent point, Miss Cooper." He presented a medal to Chira as well, and the applause grew even louder. Chira stood beside Riley, her wings spread wide, tears of joy streaming down her face. 6 months ago, she had been broken, afraid, alone. Now she stood before the entire academy, recognized and honored, strong and confident. After the ceremony, as students mingled and celebrated, a young Avarian approached Chira hesitantly. She was even smaller than Chira, with plumage of pale yellow and green. The young Avarian said, "Miss Winsong, I wanted to thank you. I came to your self-defense classes last month, and yesterday some older students tried to bully me. But I remembered what you taught me. I stood my ground. They left me alone." Chira knelt down to the younger girl's level. She said, "I'm proud of you. Standing up for yourself is never easy, but it gets easier with practice. Keep coming to the classes. Keep learning. And remember, you're never as helpless as someone wants you to believe." The young Avarian's wings fluttered with happiness, and she hugged Chira impulsively before running off to join her friends. Riley watched the exchange with a smile. Riley said, "Looks like you've become quite the role model." Chira said, "Only because you showed me how. Everything I'm teaching them, I learned from you." Riley said, "Maybe, but you made it your own. You adapted it to work for your people, in your situation. That's what makes you a good teacher." They stood together, watching the celebration, and Chira felt a contentment she had never expected to find. She had come to this academy afraid and alone, had suffered through months of torment. But she had emerged stronger, not just physically, though her training had certainly helped with that, but mentally, emotionally. She had learned that she didn't have to accept cruelty, that she could stand up, that she could fight back, and she had found a friend, a true friend, who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. As the year came to a close, Riley received news that her parents were being reassigned to a new sector. She would be transferring to a different academy. It was expected. Her father's work in the diplomatic corps meant frequent moves, but it still hurt to think about leaving. She told Chira in their usual spot in the dining hall. Chira's wings drooped when she heard the news. Chira said, "How long do we have?" Riley said, 2 weeks. We leave at the start of summer break." Chira was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to miss you. So much." Riley said, "I'll miss you too. But this isn't goodbye forever. We can stay in touch. The comm network reaches everywhere. And who knows? Maybe our paths will cross again someday." Chira said, "It won't be the same." Riley said, "No, it won't. But Chira, you don't need me anymore. You're strong now. You can handle whatever comes." Chira said, "I'm strong because of you." Riley shook her head. She said, "You're strong because of you. I just helped you see what was already there. Promise me something. Promise you'll keep training. Keep teaching. Keep standing up for yourself and others. Promise you won't forget what you've learned." Chira's wings spread in a gesture of solemn commitment. She said, "I promise. I'll never forget. Everything you taught me, everything we accomplished together. I'll carry it with me always." They spent the last 2 weeks making the most of their remaining time. They trained together every day, with Chira pushing herself harder than ever. Riley taught her everything she could think of, every technique and tactic, wanting to leave her friend as prepared as possible. On the final day, they met one last time in the low-gravity chamber where Chira had first truly flown. Riley set the gravity to a variant standard and watched as Chira took to the air, her movements now more confident and graceful than ever. When Chira landed, Riley said, "I have something for you." She handed Chira a small package. Inside was a set of protective braces, designed specifically for Avarian wings. They were lightweight but incredibly strong, made from a human-developed polymer that could absorb tremendous impact without restricting movement. Riley said, "I had them custom-made. They'll protect your wings if you ever need to fight in standard gravity. They won't make you invincible, but they'll give you a better chance." Chira's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Riley, these must have cost." Riley said, "Doesn't matter. I wanted you to have them. You're my best friend, Chira. You mean more to me than you know." They hugged, and Shira felt like her heart would break. In less than a year, this human had changed her entire life, had saved her, taught her, believed in her. How could she ever repay that? Shira said, "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For teaching me to be strong. For being my friend." Riley said, "Thank you for letting me help. For having the courage to learn and grow. For showing me what real bravery looks like." They stayed in the chamber until the last possible moment, neither wanting to say the final goodbye. But eventually, time ran out. Riley had to leave to catch her transport. As Riley walked away, Shira called out one last time. She said, "Riley?" Riley turned. She said, "Yeah?" Shira said, "Humanity, fuck yeah." Riley laughed, surprised and delighted. She said, "You learned well. Take care of yourself, Shira Windsong. I expect to hear about all the amazing things you're going to accomplish." Shira said, "I will. I promise." And Riley? "If you ever need help, if you ever find yourself facing something too big to handle alone, call me. I'll be there, no matter how far. Friends stand together, right?" Riley smiled. She said, "Right. Always." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowds of students heading home for the summer. Shira stood alone in the corridor, her wings spread wide, feeling the loss but also feeling something else. Gratitude, pride, strength. She was not the same frightened girl who had arrived at this academy. She had been broken, yes, but she had been remade stronger. And she would carry that strength forward, would use it to help others the way Riley had helped her. 2 years passed. Shira remained at Celestial Heights Academy, continuing her education and her training. She took over Riley's self-defense classes completely, expanding them further. Under her guidance, the program became an official part of the Academy's curriculum, open to all students. She faced new challenges, of course. Not everyone was happy about the changes in the Academy's culture. Some species still believed that strength should dominate weakness, that the strong had a right to prey on the vulnerable. But Shira stood firm against them, using the lessons Riley had taught her. Sometimes she used words. Sometimes she used her training. Whatever was necessary to protect those who needed protection. She graduated with honors and was accepted into the Council of Worlds diplomatic training program, following a career path similar to Riley's parents. She wanted to make a difference on a larger scale, to take the lessons she had learned at Celestial Heights and apply them throughout the galaxy. During her diplomatic training, she specialized in conflict resolution and student protection services. She developed new protocols for identifying and addressing bullying in multi-species environments. Her work was noticed by senior diplomats, and she quickly gained a reputation as someone who got results. She also maintained her self-defense training, achieving levels of skill that would have seemed impossible during those dark days when the Thraken had tormented her. She was never going to be a soldier, but she could hold her own against most opponents. More importantly, she could teach others to do the same. She kept in touch with Riley through the comm network. They exchanged messages regularly, sharing stories of their experiences, offering advice and support. Riley had continued her own journey, transferring through 3 more academies before finally graduating. She had joined the Human Defense Forces, specializing in close combat instruction. She traveled the galaxy teaching self-defense to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of species. In many ways, they were both doing the same work from different angles. Shira through diplomacy and policy, Riley through direct training and intervention. They were making the galaxy a little bit safer, one student at a time. 3 years after graduating, Shira was assigned to her first major diplomatic posting. She was sent to mediate a dispute at a frontier academy where tensions between different species were threatening to explode into violence. It was a challenging assignment for someone so young, but the council believed she had the unique perspective and skills needed to resolve the situation. When she arrived at the academy, she found a familiar situation. Larger, more aggressive species bullying smaller, weaker ones. Administration turning a blind eye to avoid political complications. Students suffering in silence, afraid to speak up. It was like looking back in time at her own experience. But she was not that frightened girl anymore. She was Shira Windsong, a trained diplomat and a skilled fighter, and she knew exactly what needed to be done. She started by meeting with the students who were being targeted, letting them know they had an ally. Then she implemented new security measures and accountability systems. She established self-defense programs, using the curriculum she had developed based on Riley's teachings. And when some of the bullies decided to test her resolve, she showed them personally why that was a mistake. The fight was over quickly. 3 students from a warrior species, confident in their strength and their right to dominate others, learned that confidence without skill was just arrogance. Chira used every technique Riley had taught her, adapted and perfected over years of practice. Within minutes, all 3 were on the ground, defeated not by superior strength, but by superior technique and unwavering determination. Word spread fast. The small Avarian diplomat who could fight like a human became a legend at that academy, just as Riley had become a legend at Celestial Heights. Within 3 months, the situation had completely transformed. Bullying incidents dropped to 0. Students felt safe. The academy became what it was always meant to be, a place of learning and growth rather than fear. 5 years after they had first met, Chira received an unexpected message. Riley was being honored by the Council of Worlds for her contributions to interspecies understanding and conflict resolution. The ceremony would be held at Celestial Heights Academy, and Riley wanted Chira to be there. Chira arrived early, walking through the familiar corridors where her life had changed so dramatically. She visited the hallway where Riley had first defended her, now marked with a memorial plaque honoring students who stood against injustice. She visited the training room where she had learned to fight, now filled with new students learning the same lessons. When the ceremony began, Chira sat in the front row and watched as Riley received the council's highest civilian honor. But when Riley gave her acceptance speech, she did something unexpected. She called Chira to the stage. Riley said to the assembled dignitaries and students, "Everything I've accomplished started with one choice. The choice to help someone who needed it. Chira showed me that the smallest act of courage can change everything. She was broken, but she refused to stay broken. She learned, she grew, she became strong. And then she took that strength and used it to help others. That's the real lesson here. We all have the power to make a difference. We just have to choose to use it." They stood together on that stage, the human and the Avarian, 2 friends who had changed each other's lives and, in doing so, had changed the lives of countless others. The audience rose in thunderous applause, and Chira felt her wings spread wide with pride and joy. Later, in the same dining hall where they had shared so many meals, they sat together one more time. Chira said, "We did it, didn't we? We actually made a difference." Riley said, "We did. And we're still making a difference. Every student we teach, every person we help, every bully we stop. It all matters." Chira said, "I never thanked you properly. You saved my life that day in the hallway." Riley shook her head. She said, "No, Chira. I gave you a chance. You saved yourself. You chose to be strong. That was all you." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and memories, planning future collaborations. They had both grown so much since that first meeting, had both achieved things they never thought possible. But the core of who they were remained unchanged. Riley was still the person who would stand up to injustice without hesitation. Chira was still the person who refused to let cruelty win. As the night ended and they prepared to go their separate ways once more, Chira realized something profound. She had spent so long being defined by what had been done to her, by her pain and fear and victimhood. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She was strong. She was capable. She was free. The bullies had broken her wings each morning, yes. But Riley had shown her how to fly again. And now, she soared higher than she ever had before, carrying with her the lessons learned and the determination to ensure that no one else would suffer as she had suffered. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but it was also filled with people like Riley, people willing to stand up and fight back. And now Chira was one of them. Her wings spread wide as she left Celestial Heights Academy for the final time, heading toward her next assignment, her next opportunity to help someone who needed it. She was no longer the victim. She was the defender, the teacher, the friend who would stand beside you when everyone else walked away. And somewhere in the galaxy, another frightened student was about to discover that they didn't have to face their bullies alone. Because people like Riley and Chira were out there, fighting to make the universe a little bit safer, one broken wing at a time. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.